For years men have searched all the hand-me-down land for Mother Nature's best. Longhorn, velvet, breathtaking beauty, thank God we're among the blessed.
Hey guys, we're back here in this series about maintaining a lease out of state. I'm here with Collin, owner and operator of Legendary Habitat. Collin is a full-time land manager. He has been doing this for several years, has even more years of experience in the field, designing properties, bettering properties for really the hunter, and establishing, growing a property and making it what you want it to be, get your best results.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on here, having me on this series. I'm excited to hopefully share some different tips and improvements that I've learned with helping clients over the years, developing several different properties and several different lease properties. And, I like to kind of almost take this approach as more so of kind of a public land approach, where there's a limited amount of things that you can do as far as the habitat side of things. But I think there's a lot of things you can do that are really simple improvements and just some minor changes to, possibly your hunting strategy and your approach, on when you're actually breaking down a lease property. And so I think, the first thing that I like to do when I'm looking at a lease property is look at a nice aerial map, break down how the habitat lays out, what are my surrounding habitat features, whether I have ag or, I do have oak ridge flats, how does all the big picture of, looking at a larger scale of how all of your connecting cover and terrain features, funnel into, this lease property.
Yeah,
and
I think that's one thing guys look at when they get a lease is what is on my property, and that's all they really focus on. When you're talking about looking at the big picture and saying, okay, yeah, these deer, you're hunting this property, but how does it work with the property surrounding it?
Yeah.
Let's dive into, the number one easiest thing that you got boots on the ground, you got a new lease, whether you make it there in the springtime or right before fall, whenever you're able to visit that property. Let's talk about what would be the number one thing that you first kind of look at, and how to, for one, keep deer on your property or spend more time on your property, or just in essence visit that property.
Okay, yeah, so I think one of the number one things that I want to look for, is where are my food sources at, on the property. I want to look and see where those deer are feeding, consistently, whether there's ag or there's oak flats. And then after I've kind of got my food sources established on the property, I can look at bedding.
Let's talk about what to look for when you're looking for a bedding area.
Yeah, so one of the big things, and I already touched on this, is looking for your terrain features. Terrain features play a big role in, deer bedding in general, but especially in more of those older age class, mature buck bedding situations. And so terrain features do several different things as it pertains to how deer are going to bed on these different terrain features and where they're going to bed. And so that's where, when I'm going into a property, I really want to see what my vegetation type is naturally, when I'm on these terrain features. And I'm reading a lot of browse in a lot of these areas. So if I'm seeing a lot more browse and more desirable species, and I'm seeing, obviously I'm finding a lot of beds up in these areas, those are really key indicators that those deer spend a lot of time there. And you can also look for, when you're finding these actual beds, I'm looking at the position of the bed, the size of the bed, and I'm also looking for what kind of hair's in the bed. If it's got a little bit bigger, thicker hair, typically those deer are bedding there more so in the fall. If it's got more thinner hair, those deer are typically bedding there, more so during the summer months. So just some key things you can be looking for to identify these bedding areas. And then we can start breaking down, once you find your food source, you find your bedding areas, we can break down those interception points. And what I really like to do is find kind of these intersecting, what I call hubs, where we've got multiple different trails coming together, where we've got doe family groups moving back and forth from bedding to food. And then we can really intercept them. And what I really like doing is putting in these mock scrapes. About 85% of the time they're hitting those at night. And so what we really want to focus on is areas where we have a scrape location and really good security cover, where those bucks are going to want to show up in daylight.
Let's talk about positioning scrapes, mock scrapes specifically, on where to place them and what to look for, and how to transition those through your property.
What I typically like to do is, if I find a scrape that's, within bedding cover, I really want to key in on that, and I'm going to try to figure out roughly where I think that buck is bedding on that property, or where he might be, transitioning through. And then, if I can get close into bedding, and I've got a scrape there, or I can set up a mock scrape there, and then I can actually get in there in a morning and hang a morning stand in that specific location. And it seems to work out really well. You're going to have other, scrapes that are typically going to be used more so in the evening when those bucks are heading, back from bedding, and they're heading, out to the evening food source. That all plays into how you're going to be able to access the property. And, as those kind of go hand in hand back and forth, it just depends on how the property lays out. And I really like to position those stands around most of my predominant winds too. So, if I've got more so of a northwest wind, I can come in and I'm going to try to design my stand locations around those winds along with my access. And if I've also got a bedding area adjacent to those areas, I really like to kind of play that fine line of the wind from where I think those, deer or that specific buck is bedding. And a lot of times those mature bucks, really want to circle downwind of those primary scrape areas. And that's really what we want to focus on hunting, is those primary scrape areas, with a lot of activity, a lot of does and fawns all coming through there. And during that pre-rut time frame is when you're going to have the most success seeing that, mature buck on his feet, scent checking through those areas.
So let's talk about a couple of like strategies that you use for, if your lease is in a bait state.
Yeah. Well, so I think one of the big things that you can do, depending on when you acquire the lease, is start conditioning these deer into coming into these areas, versus just coming out, right before hunting season and starting to, throw out some bait. I think that's huge especially for, more of those older age class bucks. When you can start to condition those deer to coming into that area really consistently, I think the success rate of that is really going to dramatically go up. And that's the same with scrapes too. If you can establish those, earlier in the season, you're going to have better success. And so, as it pertains to the minerals and feeds, I think, having those minerals as far as location goes, in areas where a lot of those velvet bucks are going to be spending a lot of their time. So it might be close to ag fields, more so in those open, closed canopy areas. Those bucks, when they're growing antlers, they don't really want to be in that thick stuff because they might damage their velvet. So, close proximity to water, areas where we got more shade, where they can, regulate their body temperature a little bit better and keep themselves cool. So those are some really key areas that I'd like to run, minerals in some of these other states where you can do that legally.
Let's talk about, you have this mineral site established,
Yep.
how to hunt that and increase your odds throughout the season with an established mineral site on your property.
Yeah, so one of the things I also like doing is coupling mineral sites, with scrape locations. And I've actually done this in several different areas where you can bait on states. And one of the things I really like doing as it pertains to creating mock scrapes, I get a lot of questions on, establishing these mock scrapes, how to get deer to start, condition them to start using these mock scrapes. And one of the things that I've done is, you make your mock scrape, whether that be an overhanging limb or a vine or a piece of rope or something like that. And then you can go through and just take a little bit of mineral, and when you make your actual scrape on the ground, I like to make those, that 24 by 24 kind of square, right down to the bare dirt. And then you can actually put some mineral right in that scrape. And especially during the summer, I love making scrapes, all throughout the summer, and get those deer conditioned to that. And those deer, really, I want that curiosity factor in there where they're going to come down, grab a little bit of mineral, and then, hopefully they're going to see that visual of that overhanging limb or that vine, and they're going to want to check it out. And then once that first deer puts that scent on that overhanging limb or that vine, it's basically game on at that point, and every other deer is going to want to come through and check that.
All right, thanks Collin for joining us today. There's a lot of small and easy things that you can do to increase your odds of leasing a property and have just a better round all experience of your lease this year. So if you want to know more about Buck Bourbon Products, just go to www.buckbourbon.com, or if you want to contact Collin, he's a wealth of knowledge, whether you are leasing a property, you want him boots on the ground there, or you just want to talk to him further about your private land and how to develop that. Contact Collin. Where's the best place for them to reach you at?
Yeah, so best place to reach me, I've got a website, legendaryhabitat.com. I've also got a podcast, Legendary Habitat Podcast. I've got a YouTube channel, And I try to put out a decent amount of content on there and educational information to help guys, get started on their properties. And if they're interested in other service, obviously get a hold of me. All my contact info is on my website, and we can go from there.
Great. I greatly appreciate you coming out today.
Well, thanks a lot for having me on here, and hopefully you guys learned some things, and good luck to everyone in the 2024 hunting season.